Welcome to the Writing on My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emmanuela Stanislaus, doctorate coach and diversity consultant. I finished my doctorate in 4 years while working a full-time job, traveling the world, and balancing a busy social life. And now I'm on a mission to create community for women of color to complete their doctorate degrees. Join me and my friends as we discuss the ups and downs of pursuing a doctorate degree and helping others to level up as doc students. Welcome to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emmanuela Stanislaus, doctorate coach and diversity consultant. Today, I am back with another special guest. I know I say that all the time, but today I am excited to have Dr. Ayana Martin here with us today. She completed her doctorate in molecular medicine and translational science at Wake Forest University. How impressed are you by that? I don't even know what that is, but she is going to tell us all about it today. Her research focused on reversing sepsis through HDAC inhibition and cellular metabolism modulation. How cool is that? While in grad school, Ayana served as the president of the Black Graduate Student Association, the graduate representative of the Student Wellness Center, and led membership recruitment for Winston-Salem Urban League young professionals. So she has a lot of background that she can share with us today. She co-founded a biotech startup, which is called Incepheal Therapeutics, which is a spin-off company from an international case competition in partnership with the NIH. Ayana went on to pursue a career in scientific communication as an Omnicom Health Group fellow at Klein Davis Mann LLC in New York City, and she's currently a clinical educator liaison in rheumatology at Bristol Myers Squibb. In her spare time, she enjoys, being a dog mom, which is one of my favorite things to do too. And she's the cool aunt, sewing, and even started a garden during the pandemic. And so, help me welcome Dr. Ayana Martin to the show.
Thank you
Welcome.
so much.
Yay. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for being here.
It's not a problem. And I know my scientific background can be a mouthful, and you did an excellent job.
I mean, I'll just say I am totally impressed by everything that you're doing. And thank you so much for being here. Why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about your PhD journey?
Sure. So, graduate school, getting this PhD was a labor of love. My journey was rocky and long, and unfortunately, it's just not as uncommon as I would have liked to believe. I was not prepared for what graduate school was. I was the first, I am the first PhD in my family. My mom has a master's degree. A bunch of my aunts also have master's degrees.
Mm-hmm.
But going straight from undergrad into graduate school, after those first 2 years, my mom and my aunts were SOL for me. They couldn't help. And it was tough. I wasn't prepared for the self-advocacy that was required. Some of my peers had their master's degrees. Some had multiple master's degrees. And, that comparison definitely kicks in, like, they're doing it and why can't I? How come I'm not succeeding? And it's honestly because they knew what they were signing up for. They had the support, the network, the advice to kind of get them through while I was just paving the way. And my program was on average a 5-year program, and I had to start over at year 4. And then on top of that, my program had a 7-year cap. So when I had to start over, I had to decide if I even wanted to finish. And to make that decision, I had to decide what I wanted to do. And when I started grad school, I wanted to have my own lab and write grants and, live the dream as a PI. And that changed. I hated writing. I didn't want to do it anymore, but I knew of nothing else as far as like what a PhD did.
Mm,
Um, and so I had to take a hard look at what I wanted to do to see if, do I master out and pursue something else? Do I stay and finish? And kind of having an exit strategy really solidified I need to get a PhD because I decided, maybe I could be a teacher. And that just was not in my heart. Um, I needed that diversity, like the diversity of my day. I just loved having it be different every day. And with teaching, the students are the same, the curriculum is the same.
mm,
Maybe year to year, your students are different, but that just wasn't enough change for me. So that just was not in my heart. And I was like, well, I could just go back to being a lab tech and still do the research. But I realized I would top out pretty quickly because I could be the best like lab tech there was. And if I had a PI worth any salt, they would say, Ayana, you need your own lab.
mm,
Go to grad school, and I'd be right back where I started. And so I was like, all right, I still don't like grant writing. So what do I like? And so I sat in a room by myself, just like desperate to decide. And I was like, what are my favorite parts of grad school? And if I could just like make up a job, let's see if I can find anything that aligns with what I make up. And so I sat in a room and was like, my favorite parts are the travel to conferences and presenting my data and having those like good speculation conversations about, if this research worked out, what could that mean? How would that change the face of science? How would that change the lives of patients? Those are my favorite things about, my conversations presenting data. And I was like, that's all I want to be. I just want to get paid to talk about science. I just want to be the face of science. And so I started Googling, what jobs do this? And I ran across medical science liaison and the field of scientific communication. And so I was like, all right, if I want to do that, what's the degree requirement? Because I'm still deciding, like, am I just going to go home, tuck my tail, and wipe the egg off my face and start over,
mhm,
start a new life, or am I going to be called doctor at the end of this? And for a medical science liaison, a PhD was required, terminal degree was required. And I was like, well, that's it. I'm finishing. And so that really shaped the last 3 years of my PhD program because I had an exit strategy, I had a direction, and everything I did from that point moving forward was to gain skills for that. And so I had a targeted plan. That's how I got involved with the case competition and ended up starting a biotech business because moving into the medical science liaison role, you work for a pharmaceutical company, and that's business, that's commercial. Um, and I knew my scientific background was needed, but I knew nothing about science and business together. So I took advantage of all these opportunities. I interned to just learn how to talk about science to, regular people. How do I get them to appreciate it and make changes in their life? I took a business of science course. I did the business plan competition. Um, and all of those things gave me translatable skills that really helped my dream come together because my current title is clinical educator liaison. And that is just like, it's the same thing as a medical science liaison. It's considered for BMS, it's considered a contract role. So it's the same thing. I'm living my dream right now. And then the other thing that was on top of that that really got me through was having a PhD mentor that fully supported all of these extra things that were geared towards industry. Because in science, in a PhD program, they really gear you to stay in academia.
mhm,
And there are professors out there who will not support you going into industry. They'll throw up their hands and say, oh, no, I'm not going to help you do that. Or I know nothing about it. Sorry. My mentor would say, I don't know much about it, but let's come up with a plan to change your personal statement or find something that you want to do. And if he had to write a recommendation letter, he would absolutely do it. So that was extremely beneficial to me finishing and moving in the direction of, the career that I wanted.
awesome. I think that your, answer gave so many nuggets. I was taking down notes, like, not knowing what to do with a PhD student I mean, with a PhD, degree, trying to sit down and figure out what you wanna do. You're having an exit strategy, interning and taking courses and participating in competitions that help you to gain the skills that you want for that exit strategy that you have. And then, your mentors too. And having what I like to call like your personal board of directors, where you have different people that serve different roles.
Mhm.
And then even the push and pull that you have with faculty who really think that the PhD route is just for academic pursuits, and you are a
Yes.
human being that has a lot of different interests, right? And so
Yeah.
there's so many things that I want to like dive into. Okay, so
Take your pick.
right? Oh my god, so many. So let's talk a little bit about how did you said you experienced not wanting to finish. Let's talk a little bit about that because I think that's a real thing. I know I personally had that. And we know there's statistics that show that half of those who start their PhD programs never finish.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
right? That's real. So tell us a little bit about like what um created those feelings of not wanting to finish, and how did you overcome I mean, I guess you spoke a little bit about that, but just talk a little bit about what that process was like so that I guess our listeners can see that there may be some pieces to your story that they can relate to.
Yeah, so, like you said, a lot of people start and don't finish. And when I looked around and saw who was quitting, who was not finishing, who was having a hard time, it seemed like all those people looked like me. I remember when I interviewed at Wake Forest, and there was a Black girl who was probably second or third year. And she was one of the guys that took us around, wined and dined us. And so I was excited to come back. And when I came back, I saw her like the first couple weeks of school, and that was it. I never saw her again.
Hmm.
She just disappeared. She left. And there was another girl who um she also did 7 years. And not because she had to start over in a new lab. I don't honestly know like what took her so long, but there was a push pull with her too. And she almost quit for like other political reasons. There were definitely tough race relations. Wake Forest is in North Carolina, the South. Those things still creep in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was no exception to that as well. And so it was tough looking around and seeing everyone just dropping like flies. And I was like, but I'm strong, I'm resilient. I went to an HBCU. Like, I knew I had support. But when the support became so repetitive of like, oh, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. And that's all that the support was. It was not anything tangible that I could adjust to the things that were happening in grad school. Grad school was the first time in my life that it did not matter how hard I studied. You know, the numbers that came back on the test would be like 50%, 60%. And while a lot of people are failing, the curved grades in graduate school are something out of this world. you know, I remember I took an exam and I think I got like a 52%, and that was a B
Wow.
because everybody is struggling in these classes. But your whole life from preschool all the way up through college, 100% was 100%. Curbing a grade might have been 10%. It was never half the test. And so it was really the first time in my life that I'm studying, studying, studying all night in the library. We have our study groups, and I'm still only pulling up 52%, 60% on some of these tests. And while I'm passing relative to the class, I'm in the middle to upper half of the class, it still did not feel good. So I'm like grappling with the idea of, am I good enough? Am I really good enough for this? And in grad school, no one is there holding your hand saying like, oh, good job. No one is there to kind of console you through this other than your peers. And that was really tough, like for my identity, because I had always been, the smart girl.
Yeah.
I went to undergrad on a full academic scholarship, and I maintained a 4.0 throughout college, mostly because I was homesick. I was in South Carolina, and I'm originally from Southern California. So a lot of that just came from I had nothing else to do but study.
Okay.
But, the whole idea of like you work hard and the intended outcome is your grades are good. That had, been true all the way through college. And here I am in grad school, with all these textbooks that, people can't pronounce some of these things. And I just got to make it through the test, and I just got to pass the test. And when it comes back at like 50%, 60%, that's very disheartening. And so that was like strike one, dagger to the heart, that I'm all of a sudden like, I know I'm smart, but according to all of these classes for 2 years straight, it's like I'm grappling with this idea of, that question in the back of my mind, but am I?
Yeah.
And so I remember I had a breakdown at the
Mm.
Costco gas station.
Oh boy.
Came out of nowhere because I remember I was telling my mom this. I was like, Mom, I'm working hard, harder than I've ever worked before. I'm writing papers, I'm studying for these tests, and they're still coming back with these terrible grades. And the teachers are curving the test. So, everybody is struggling, but like, they're adjusting to our level of smartness instead of like bringing us up to, whatever the standard is. The teachers aren't saying like, oh, these are some things you guys didn't understand, so here, let me help you. That was not the culture. And so I'm explaining this to my mom. I'm like, Mom, it doesn't matter how much I study. Like, I can't get this right. And she was like, well, have you tried this? Have you done that? This is what I would do. And she went through a whole list of things. And I was like, Mom, I've done it all, and it's still not working. And I was like, and my mom has never told me, well, I don't know, I can't help you. And that was the first time she had ever told me, well, I don't know, I can't help. I've listed everything that I would have done in your shoes, and you've done it all, which means you're doing the right thing. But it wasn't resolved as far as like the outcome was what I wanted. So I just like broke down crying because I'm like, this is the end.
Yeah.
And I was suffering with imposter syndrome and didn't know what that was. So a lot of my emotions were just bubbling up. And it really was affecting like my attention in class. And there was a student wellness center that provided free counseling. And one of my professors kind of noticed that my attention was waning, and just my enthusiasm for things was shifting.
Mm-hmm.
And so he suggested that during like one of the student performance reviews or something, he suggested, take up the student wellness center. And I also had the irrational, there was no real founded reason why I was against therapy, but again, those things, those racial things just trickle up. And that was one of them where I was just like that stigma, like, I don't need help. I'm strong.
I'll
I got
figure it
this. I just
out.
got to tough
Yeah.
it out. And so I went to therapy because, I just wanted to oblige the professor. So I signed up for the therapy class, or not class, but I signed up for the student wellness center, the free therapy. And I was like, well, at least it's free. And I got assigned to this wonderful lady. But I was so against it at first because I was like, what is this little white lady going to tell me that I don't already know? I was so against it. And I feel like that is a story, just being so against like shifting to graduate school. I feel like that's a story that a lot of us face.
Yeah.
Because we got to where we were by any means necessary. And when by any means necessary is not working for us, we don't know what else to do. And so, this lady was so wonderful. She was so empathetic. Her background was also one of struggle, because I think she grew up in like Mississippi, in like the lower middle class. So while it wasn't a race thing, it was definitely the struggle that she could empathize with. And she went to graduate school, got a master's and a PhD as a single mother. of two boys on top of that. So there were struggles that paralleled, and she was able to kind of get me to see those parallels, that helped me shift and adjust. And I think that is really what kind of shifted my mentality of like, all right, everything that I've ever known to get me out of these situations or to get me through them has come to an end. And it's
Mhm.
time for something new. And change is hard, but she really helped me become open to that change, become open to playing the game of graduate school, because you have a committee that you have to please. And when you're in shoes like mine, where you had to start over, everybody looks at you like this girl can't do it. But by that time, I was at year 4, and the breakdown was like 2 years prior. So I knew I could do it.
Mhm.
But in those 2 years of going to therapy through the Student Wellness Center, it opened me up to the changes that I needed to make that just felt abrasive, but actually were the keys to me finishing, and the keys to me getting out, and the keys to me getting that doctorate and not quitting.
I love that. I think when you talk about that, because I know for me, seeking the help of a mental health professional was key for me, to see some of the things that I didn't see. I don't know if that was what it was for you.
Hmm.
Um
It was.
awesome. And I want to talk a little bit about that too, but I think one thing that stood out to me with what you said was like, I feel like therapy gave you a a different toolkit or added to your toolkit, right? Like you used all the tools that you had, and now it's like, the therapy opened you up to, having a toolkit that had maybe 100 pieces versus the 32 pieces that you had maybe when you came into your doctorate program.
Exactly. It did.
So, what were some of the things that therapy, I mean, not to, dig too deep, but like what were some of the things that you think um that you became aware of that helped you to shift a little bit?
Imposter syndrome was one of them. That whole feeling that I didn't belong,
Mm,
that was a big deal for me, because that's just one of my vulnerabilities is, feeling that I belong, feeling that I'm worthy. And that was my biggest grapple, because literally that's what you're doing. So I remember somebody told me PhD is the highest degree in the land. Why? Because every other degree, terminal or not, every other degree, you basically test out. You take the test, you pass the test, and you get the degree. Med school is that way, PharmD school is that way.
mhm.
But with a PhD, with the doctorate programs, you have to convince 5 people that you've done enough.
Yeah.
There's no there's it's all open-ended.
You're so right. I hadn't
And I
yeah.
was like, "Oh my gosh." This is like groundbreaking. So that was like at some like networking social with like Black young professionals, that somebody told me that and really opened my eyes. So when he said that, it really struck me, because I'm literally proving my worth, but I struggle with feeling worthy. So
Mhm.
how do I prove my worth to 5 people when I can barely prove my worth to myself?
Wow.
So we address some of those things in therapy. And um, one of the things that we practiced a lot was the Wonder Woman pose.
Yes.
So there's a TED talk on that.
I love that. Everyone should go watch that TED Talk. Yes.
Yes,
I did that before
everyone
my
should do it.
defense too. Like
But it works. And I think one of the reasons why this particular therapist was so powerful for me was because she had a lot of information to back it up. So she had like information. I think the thing that convinced me to even try Wonder Woman pose, because I was like, this is silly. I'm not going to stand in my bathroom, look in the mirror, and just stare at myself for 5 minutes. Like, that's 3 minutes, 2 minutes. That's too long. And so I was like, I feel silly trying this. But something she said that convinced me to try it, and why her method of therapy worked for me, was because she had a lot of research to back it up. So she was saying that there was some study where they looked at body cues of like affirmation. and she pointed out or brought some information from the study where blind people who were born blind, so they've never seen this motion of Wonder Woman pose or like the celebratory where you like throw your hands in the air. They've never seen it. Yet, when you observe them doing something and becoming successful, when they cross a finish line, because they've done like a 5K walk or something, the natural response of the body for the exclamation is to raise your hands and spread them wide, that power pose. So even blind people who have never seen this. So she was like, so there's something physical in the body, endorphins flow, but there's something physical that is just naturally within us. So when you stand in that pose, it activates those things and you begin to get that powerful feeling.
Hmm.
So that convinced me. And I was like,
Mhm.
all right, I'm gonna try it. And it literally worked. So whenever I had like a committee meeting or a lab meeting where I had to present and I knew I was gonna field questions that I was always uncomfortable not knowing the answer, even if nobody else knew the answer, because the answer may not even exist. For whatever reason, I felt bad that I didn't know the answer. And so I would do the Wonder Woman pose um, before the meeting. If I was in the meeting and even was getting stuck, I would do like the lower half of the body. So I would spread my feet. I might put my hands like near my hips or just like hold them to my thighs and hold my like elbows back a little bit to like have a taller posture, but it was like the best I could do without looking weird in the meeting. um, or I would use the podium. So I put my hands on the podium and spread my elbows just to
Mm.
kind of like remind my body of the Wonder Woman pose. And it always worked. Um, so that was one of the biggest things in therapy that we tackled was the imposter syndrome, feeling worthy. There was a mantra that she taught me, and I think she made it up because like when I try and Google it, I can never find it. But there was a daily mantra that I would um, say that was like, I claim my dignity, my self-sufficiency, and my belonging in this world.
Mm.
Because she, before Black Lives Matter, she would always say, like, you matter, your space, your being, your presence in a room. You matter, you belong there. And so hearing it from other people, as wonderful as that is, it does nothing if I didn't believe it. And so I literally like typed it up and printed it out and taped it to like my mirror, my front door, and I think I had it in my car too. And whenever I was just feeling, beating up on myself and just letting that imposter syndrome take over, I would repeat that mantra of, I claim my dignity, my self sufficiency, and my belonging in this world.
Wow. I love that mantra. I'm gonna have to type that up and put that somewhere for me too. I mean, I can totally relate to your story because my therapist really helped with those imposter syndrome episodes that I had for myself. And I think what's great about this conversation that we're having is I think people don't know what you can do in these sessions, right, with your therapist. And
Hmm.
I think what you just shared is that a therapist can be someone who pours into you and gives you the tools that you need so that you can turn around and face this harsh world, right? And
Hmm.
the things that are even inside of us too that make it even harsher sometimes. It's not always about you know, depression or anxiety or other mental health types of things that you need to work through. It could be things that you're just struggling through, which is, the whole imposter syndrome that you're talking about. So I appreciate you kind of sharing um, how she was helpful for you. And in hopes that we can encourage others too, because some of the conversations I've been having with other guests have been around um, the the benefits of seeing a mental health counselor. So hopefully, we can encourage folks to
I
do
hope
that.
so. I
Yeah.
really do hope that encourages somebody to let the guard down with just one person.
Exactly. And it could mean the world for you and your success and how you navigate your doctorate as well as how you navigate the world because these things will come out like in your career too and all of those kinds of things.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So let's go back a little bit. How did you go about deciding your program and what kind of influenced you to pursue your doctorate?
Yeah, so I decided to even pursue a PhD. Short answer to that is I wanted to be called doctor. Like I wanted to be the expert in the room on something.
Awesome.
Um, and just the longer answer to that is as a kid, I just had a passion for helping people and solving puzzles. And so, that typically manifests as, oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to help babies or I want to help, people stay healthy. I want to figure out their disease and fix it. Um, and that was just, what I knew. I didn't know about the rest of doctorates, and I had no idea of this whole other world of what other types of doctors there were. So when I got to college, that was when I was introduced to research. There's basic research, basic science. There's clinical research, which is something that translates to the hospital setting, doing like clinical trials. And then there's like drug development research. And so I decided in college that I really wanted to, instead of being the doctor that prescribes the medicines, I wanted to create the medicines because we all hear that long list of at the end of the drug commercials, that long list of you could go blind, you could lose a limb. And it was like, there's got to be a better way.
Exactly.
Um, and so I was like, well, doctors, when I was in grad school, I also learned like doctors don't really know the details of that. They know the outcome that the medicine is supposed to fix. They know the symptom that it's supposed to alleviate. But when there are underlying causes for those symptoms, taking a deeper look into what medicine can target multiple things. Doctors just don't have the capacity just between patients and so, all the patients that they have, they might not have the capacity to really think that through. And so I was like, well, I want to just help create better medicines to make it easier for the doctors. Um, so that was really the trigger for why I do a PhD. And then also pragmatically, graduate school paid in STEM and med school didn't. So I was like, how am I going to even pay for med school? I hadn't paid for college. Student loans seem so scary because, all the counseling that goes into it in undergrad, and, they make debt sound like, oh, it's going to be this mountain. It's going to be this burden, which it is.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. But I feared that. And so I was like, well, if I can be called doctor either way and they're going to pay me to be a student, like I'm going to take that route. But I was still fascinated by the MD world. And so I learned about a program, the molecular medicine programs at various schools that had that medical component. So a lot of the molecular medicine programs that were around at the time. So when I started grad school, I think there were about 9 programs for molecular medicine in the United States. And they all had like a medical rotation or required like an MD mentor to make sure that your research was relevant to the hospital setting. Because I had done internships before, I had done like plant genetics, and I was like, this is all well and good, but what do I care if this freeway weed multiplies or doesn't? I didn't really care. Like it didn't get me excited. But that gave me the skills that I used that I learned there, I applied to like human research. So that's when during internships, I got into animal models, where animal models can mimic human diseases. And I was like, okay, this is much more exciting, but I still wanted that extra step of like, I wanted to be human because every day when I look in the mirror, I see a human.
Yeah.
I see me. And I really wanted to target those diseases that affected Black people, Black women, the people that looked like me. And so um, I looked at these programs that had that medical component to it. And so I only applied, well, I say only, but I applied to 9 graduate programs. And I ended up picking Wake Forest because Wake Forest had the longest history. So at that time, also, molecular medicine was like it was a new buzzword. Translational science, translational medicine was a new buzzword. So there weren't very many programs that had been established. And Wake Forest program had been around about 20 years at that time. So they had outcomes of what do those students do? Do they pick careers that are medically related, or, do they go and do something else because grad school is so horrible? So I had those metrics. And so that was why I picked molecular medicine, because I had to do a medical rotation. I had to have an MD mentor as well as a PhD mentor. And ultimately, my graduating work impacted the hospital setting because I had two MD mentors actually. And one of them was an anesthesiologist in the ICU treating sepsis patients.
Mm.
So the work that I did informed some of her practices in the hospital, because at academic hospitals, there are experimental procedures that get approved as well. So, and then the things that happened in the clinic, my mentor would also bring back to the lab to say, I keep seeing this phenomenon. I keep seeing these symptoms. And we check for it in our animal models. And if it was there, we'd find ways to, alleviate that symptom or find something else. So that was really what I wanted to do, because I felt like, if I finish in 5 years, I'm fresh out of college. I think I was like 21, 22. I'm like, I'm still young enough to go to med school if I really want to. So I did that program because it kind of blended both worlds. And that medical rotation really did show me that I don't want to be a doctor. I
Mm.
don't want to treat patients. For me, it's the compliance issue
Okay.
where patients don't take their medicine and they come back to me, say, doctor, I'm still not feeling good. I'm like, well, you didn't take your medicine. And as a doctor, you can't say, well, you must want to die if you're not going to take your HIV meds. You can't say that,
Yeah.
So that really did deter me from going the MD route. And bless those who deal with compliance. I could not take the bad with the good. I was going to throw that baby out with the bathwater if I was an MD. So I picked the right route. And I'm really glad that I picked that route, because it did give me the exposure. Because how awful would it have been if I took the MD route and realized I did not want to do this? I just cannot handle the patients not listening to me as their doctor. And here I've spent 4 years getting this degree and I really don't enjoy it. So that was how I chose the program.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that too, and you going through that process of like eliminating things like, okay, I don't
Hmm.
want to do this or whatever. And so
That's that
um
scientific method.
exactly, it's a part of your DNA now, right?
It is.
And I appreciated you sharing too, like what you can do with molecular medicine for like any, of our folks here who are thinking of other things. A lot of times, we don't know outside of the MD like what you can do. So I appreciated that
Hmm.
too. So you talked a little bit about what you do now, but like are there things based off of what you do now that you turn around and look and say, "Man, I wish I knew this when I started my program."
Um, let's see. So for what I do now, oh yes, absolutely. When I started my program, and I think this is for, it doesn't matter if you're getting a PhD or not, this is just for like adulting, proper adulting in the world. But in grad school, it changes everything. Um, is that balance of toughing it out versus advocating for yourself.
Hmm.
It's a delicate balance of, do I just tough it out and get through this? The whole picking your battles, but then also advocating for myself. I did not know or appreciate what that looked like, what that felt like, and what that meant for my trajectory. One example was in grad school, my program had 2 rotations your first year. Most programs have 3 rotations with the option of a fourth. My program had 2 rotations with the option of a third.
Hmm.
And your first option is a shot in the dark, no matter what. Unless you're familiar with the school, you've done some pre-networking or something. I don't know, you have family legacy there, but your first rotation is a shot in the dark. Your second rotation is a little bit better, but you're not going to be accurate or precise picking a project. Um, and that third option, because it's an option, the powers that be were really influential in trying to dissuade you from
Mm,
doing a third option. They
mhm.
put that time pressure on, like, well, if you pick one of these labs, you'll get started on your project and you'll have more time to, work on your writing and blah, blah, blah. Like they really use those fear factors against you. Like, well, these labs have funding and, well, what's your third option going to be? It was the whole like wasting time and who had funding and just, basically just get on with it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had heard already of how, pressuring they could be with just picking from one of your two. And
Mm,
so that's what I did because I wanted to avoid that fight. I didn't want to pick that battle. And by not picking that battle, because the third rotation that I would have done would have actually been the lab that I finished in. So I didn't I didn't push the needle for that. I didn't advocate for myself and I ended up paying for it in time.
mm,
And that's something that I had to learn, I had to learn that skill very late, at the point where I'm backed into a corner and I'm deciding, do I stay or do I go? I had to advocate for myself then. What do I want to do? Well, hey, PhD mentor, hey, doctor mentor, I don't want to stay in academia. I want to do something else. Bringing that conversation to the table was scary. And
yeah.
so, like, those feelings of fear, I had to learn to like sit with it, operate in it, and still try and get my way because for a very long time, any type of dissent on what I was saying or doing, I say, you know what, you're right. You're the doctor. Like you have your degree, you have your title. And in the back of your mind, you really hope that they have your best interests. And so you're like, fine, I'll do it your way. And you cave. You cave so quickly. Well, I say you, I caved. I caved so quickly every time.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until the end where it was basically life or death of this PhD that I chose life of this PhD and I had to fight for it.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. And I think everybody thinks about that. Like sometimes you think that your advisor or the faculty have your best interest, but they have pressures that they're working through too, right? They have to
Mhm.
they're evaluated by how many people they push through the program, how many drop out or don't
Yeah.
finish. And so it's in their best interest that they're pushing you, you know, through the path that they think will help you to succeed the quickest and things like that. And a lot of times you have to push back on it. Especially if you have different things in mind for yourself and
Mhm.
especially if they haven't taken the time to get to know
Absolutely.
the things that you want to do. And so like how did you have that conversation um with your advisors about, hey, I want to go this route? Like how did that go? I'm getting anxiety just thinking
I know, right? Right? Your heart starts racing, you get all warm, clammy.
Mhm.
So two things. One is my circumstances really started out shaping that whole conversation because I had a 7-year cap on my program and I was starting over in a new lab. The time did not start over for me. So I only had 3 years to complete a PhD. Again, this is on average a 5-year program.
Yeah.
4 years to get the actual work done because of, the first year's rotations. But I had three.
Mm,
And so my mentor taking me on, again, some of those same pressures you talked about, getting the student through, making sure they're successful. My mentor had to weigh that before he even decided to take me into his lab. And so we had that conversation of this is going to be tough. We need to have a plan from start, a timeline from start. checkpoints from start
Mm,
to get you through. So he was focused on getting me out,
okay.
which is great. But I was focused on surviving and thriving on the other side. Like, get me out, but I don't want to be so beat up that I can't do anything. So, so the circumstances kind of shaped that. But what I've learned since then, um, as I've pursued different, career paths, I mean, they've all related, but they've been different. What I have learned is set up one-on-one time, even if you have nothing to talk about, because when the times that you have nothing to talk about, you actually have something to talk about. And it's those things about, what do you want to do for yourself with your career, with your degree, with your research, with your, current work. That's where those personal goals really have the space to kind of thrive. It's those meetings where it's like, we have this, and last week, or however frequently, let's say it's every other week. Well, last time we talked, I'm still working on those things, and I'll have it to you for review for whenever. But because that time is preserved, use it. You call in or you meet and you say, yeah, I don't have much to talk about, but there was something interesting that I ran across, and I want to get your opinion on it.
So true.
And
Oh,
and
go
it,
ahead,
it
sorry.
oh, no, it's fine. It creates a safer space. And if your mentor is not a safe space, if it's just work for your mentor, you must have that outside mentor that you set those one-on-ones up with, for that safe space and for that personal development, getting those outside opinions. That's something that I still struggle with sometimes, because like when things are good, I just kind of like to let it be good. But from my experience, I've learned, you just call in and say, hey, I don't have much to talk about. What about you? And you always find something to fill the space, whether it's something personal about, like, yeah, the riots around here, they're kicking up. And now your mentor, your manager, your boss knows, like, you might have some personal things that might interfere with your work things, and this has now become a safe space to kind of address those, to have your manager, your mentor, your boss say, well, how are you doing with that? So yeah, I think one-on-ones I think they're a key for all of us to really just lean in.
Yeah, and keep that open line of communication.
Hmm.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about you know, academia industry. Talk a little bit about what your transition was like from academia to the industry.
So the transition was, it was not what I was expecting. Um, because I transitioned out of academia. So had I stayed in academia, my doctor would just been like regular, because that's just what you do in academia, right?
Mhm.
But when I transitioned out, everybody was like calling me, "Ooh, doctor, doctor, doctor!" Like it's all impressive, right? But you're still
Mhm.
like battle worn. You're just like, what? Me, the doctor? Like, I don't know if you've seen that meme of, like, when you were a kid, you always ran to the adult in the room when there was an emergency, and as an adult, you still kind of run to the adult in the room.
Uh-huh.
So with that doctor, everybody thought I was that adult in the room, and I'm like, no. So it was interesting. It was interesting to experience that feeling that I had wanted, right? Like, I wanted to be
Mhm.
called doctor, and now everybody's doing it, and it felt weird.
Yeah.
It felt weird to say out loud. So I had to first get used to that. Um, and then just getting into industry, academia and industry are so different. Academia tends to view industry as like the devil. They're all about the money.
Mm.
But when you're a PhD and you're fresh out and you've been living so poor, you're all about the money too. So it's glistening. It's all this gold. But there is the political atmosphere is a little bit different, because you're allowed to be selfish. And again, that self advocacy, if you haven't practiced that in grad school, you'll get run over in industry. Whereas in grad school, there's politics to both sides, but they're a little bit different. In grad school, the politics is for the PI,
Yeah.
making sure your PI looks good because it should trickle down to you. But in industry, it's a big company. and you want to make sure you look good. So the politics are a little bit different. Optics
Mhm.
is a big thing where it was the first time I was in a 9 to 5 world and people literally came in 8:30, 9 o'clock, and people literally left 5:30. Like when it's quitting time, people left. And I had not experienced that in grad school because it's like, okay, you can leave this space and go home to continue working.
Yeah.
And so I was actually, I wouldn't say warned, but I was advised or cautioned about, working in the off time because I just thought being a hard worker was a good thing. Like, how could this ever look bad? And then someone gave me a new perspective of, well, if everybody's coming in at 9, everybody's leaving at 5, and they have families and things like that, work-life balance was actually really good where I was. If you go home and keep working and you come out looking like a superstar, that's what you think is going to happen. But it could actually be viewed as you're just trying to make yourself look better in the dark corners.
Okay.
And it could actually take away from that, that team player optic. And I had never considered that of, fitting into the work culture. Um, I was in a field where the client was always right. And so networking wasn't just talking to people who do amazing things. Networking became catering to egos, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just different for me, where, I'm a data girl. So the numbers are always right and not the client if the client wants different numbers. And so I had to
Mhm.
learn corporate speak to kind of find that middle ground and make the client think that they're still right. So that was fun. But, and establishing those work boundaries, I realized that I was and still am a workaholic.
Mm.
And as a black woman,
Yeah.
I am determined to let that go for
Yeah.
my health, my well-being, my future family, my current, my current family, my sister, my aunt, my nephews. I enjoy putting my phone down and just like being present with them. It's not always easy because my habit is a very long habit of, well, I can do a little bit of work while you're playing with your Beyblades.
Yeah.
But, if my nephew is telling me a story and I'm not listening, how much of that is he internalizing?
Yeah.
So establishing those work boundaries, taking vacation, those are things that academia is not going to tell you about. They want you to be a workaholic. And industry, most of industry, from my experience, has been very well balanced. And I had to adapt to that work culture. And I think transitioning, the hardest part of the transition for me was actually my resume.
Mm.
Because changing my resume in academia, you list everything you did, all your
Exactly.
writings, everything you've done, all your value, all your worth is right there in paper and you're proud of it because the longer it is, the better it is, right?
Mhm.
Industry, no. It's what can you do for me? So you turn your whole thesis into a short 1.5 sentence. And so I just felt like I was cutting out parts of me that had been so valuable in academia. And I remember when I put those resumes out, I felt terrible about them. I hated them. And I had help rewriting my resume
Mhm.
from a recruiter that was recruiting for industry. And so he took a look at my resume and all the red ink, cut this, shorten this, the star method,
Uh-huh.
and no more than 2 bullet points. And I cried when I shifted my resume. And I didn't want to send them out, but I was like, well, if I don't, I'm going to be unemployed. So I sent them out anyway, and I hated it. But the thing that happened was jobs called me back.
Yeah.
They weren't calling me back with my with my long CV. The only ones that would call me back with my long like academic CV were the ones who could read through it and translate and say, "Oh, we need this skill, we need that skill." But as far as the other industry jobs where they're getting different types of PhDs, different types of master's backgrounds, and those skills are set forth right there in plain view.
Mhm.
And then the programming systems, where if you don't have like 70 to 80% or whatever of matching words, you're automatically rejected. I was getting a lot of those with my academic CV. And with the CV that made me cry, or with the resume that made me cry, I started getting callbacks. So I was like, all right, well, I guess it worked.
Yes, because the resumes are such a personal thing. And when they start cutting through, which I get when I work with people and revising their resumes, it's that you feel like they're cutting your arm off. You're like,
Yes.
no, that's a part of me.
Yes.
So I
It's
just
important. You have the memories attached to it too.
exactly. So I totally get it. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing that piece. I think now I want to transition to the lightning round questions.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the part where I ask you a quick kind of thing as it relates to your doctorate um journey, and then you answer the quickest thing that comes to mind. Ready?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So, your favorite mantra while as a doc student?
I think it was I claim my dignity, self sufficiency, and my belonging in this world.
Yes,
That was it.
that's a good one. Okay, one thing you couldn't live without.
My dogs. Well, I had two dogs in grad school, but I still have one. And I have vowed to never live my life without a dog again. But before I had therapy, I had dogs.
Mhm. Yeah, they give the best cuddles.
They do. They also were very in tune to my emotions. So
Yeah.
I noticed that they would get very mouthy and barky if I was stressed.
Mm,
And if I was sad, one of them was a super cuddler when I was sad.
yeah, I agree. Favorite hype song?
Currently, it is Savage, Megan Thee Stallion. I wish I had that in grad school.
Right?
Um,
That's a
but
good
yeah,
one.
that one, I mean, anyone in grad school is a savage, beasting it out, toughing it out.
For real. That is awesome.
Keep being a
Uh,
savage.
right? PhD savage. Okay,
Yes.
what was your go-to practice to celebrate your wins?
So, something I did when I was in grad school and in those negative spaces was um, I would, because the negative spiral is real, I would start to counter it by listing just all positive things I could think of. So, it might not necessarily be a win,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
it helps me think about, what are good things that I'm doing or what are good things about me. So, I would just list them until I couldn't list anymore or until my mood shifted. Like until I was aware that my mood shifted. I would just list them all day, sometimes for hours of like, I like my hair today. I
Uh-huh.
showered, I'm
Yeah.
kind, I'm smart, I had that bomb presentation.
Mhm.
I did not tell my mentor off. Like I would just list things that were positive. Like, I like my body. My thighs are
Yeah.
my favorite or whatever. Like I would just list until I couldn't list anymore,
Awesome. I like that
which
too.
you should be able to go on forever. But when my mood noticeably shifted, that's when I would stop.
Okay. I love that. And then the last one is best piece of advice you received as a student.
This actually came from my therapist, who again had experiences of struggles in grad school. And her
Mhm.
advice was don't try to be superwoman, don't try to save the world while in grad school. And it was really about like my PhD project. So, in grad school, you could do like breast cancer research, for example. Like, don't try and cure breast cancer. Don't try and create a new drug.
Mhm.
Just pick a project that you can finish, get out, and save the world after, when those degrees, when those credentials are behind your name.
Yeah.
When you walk in the room and everyone's like, oh, this is Dr. Ayana. What is she working on? Now you can start working on saving the world.
Yes.
But it was really about like, don't pick the project that seems amazing, because I felt like that was something like my Black womanhood really wanted. Like, I wanted to be an amazing grad student. I wanted people to talk high and low about, oh, when she was in grad school, none of that. You're going to get that no matter what, because in any field, when you're in grad school, you're writing and researching something that needs an answer. It
So
doesn't
true.
have to be, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking. Don't reinvent the wheel. You're going to contribute something amazing to this world. You're going to answer a question. What's obvious to you might not be obvious to everyone else. So if it seems obvious to you, just keep working on it, because it's not obvious to everyone. Don't save the world, get out, get your degree, and save the world later.
So true. I got that same advice. Like, this is not your life's work. Like, do what you need to do,
Yes.
and then you do your life's work after your doctorate. So,
Yes.
great piece of advice. So, I wanted to see if you can share how people can connect with you and follow you.
Yeah, so Instagram is probably the best way. That's where I'm most active. And my Instagram handle is at insert verb here, which is a play on Mad Libs. I don't know if you're familiar with that game where
Mhm.
you list out like a noun, verb, adjective, whatever, and you plug it into this story,
Yeah.
and it creates like a silly story. But it's a play on that. Insert verb here, and the original tagline was "Black girls do it too." Um, so, tell me anything. Give me an action verb, and I guarantee I either have done it or can do it or will do it. And
Love it.
it's an idea that I piloted for a nonprofit. So I have tested it out as far as like feasibility. Um, but it's something that I want to put out into the world just to encourage the, Black people, but especially Black women, young Black girls, moving out of their comfort zone and into a space where they can do it too. So getting a
Yeah.
PhD, I didn't see a lot of Black girls around me getting a PhD, but I did it. And I think anybody can do it, with the right support and with the right motivation. So that's kind of like the background on the name. There is a blog, insertverbhere.com, that I occasionally write write on. So followers definitely help me be accountable. But there are some stories up, from when I piloted the idea. The ultimate idea is travel, because that's the most extreme version of getting outside of your comfort zone.
Mhm.
Um, but you don't have to travel to get outside of your comfort zone. Just get out of your house safely with a mask,
Yes.
please, from your friendly local scientist.
Yes. Believe Dr.
um,
Martin.
but yes, insert verb here is my Instagram handle. It is private, but I will accept. And, um, I'm pretty active on there.
Yes, and I will add the information to the show notes too, so that people can find the blog as well as connect with you on Instagram. I appreciate you for being on here, Dr. Martin, and appreciated you just sharing all of these golden nuggets and takeaways that people can just put into their life and routine, and so that we can I'm tired of onlys, and so let's stop, no more onlys.
Yes, finger
So yeah,
snaps.
right? So let's end that, and that's what this space is all about. Let's create more PhDs and EDDs out there in the world. And thank you again so much for being a guest on today's show.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stanislaus, for inviting me. I was excited for the invitation, and I really do hope that it helps somebody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. If you're loving the content, make sure to subscribe and rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other women of color doctoral students find the podcast. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Emmanuela. And if you're looking for a group of real women of color doctoral students to help you accomplish your goals, join the Writing on My Mind community by visiting writingonmymindpodcast.com. See you on the next episode.